Senate will come to order this Thursday, March 10th. Roll call, please.
19th Legislative Day, Thursday, March 10th, 2022. Roll call. Anderson. Here. Baldwin. Here. Beitman. Here. Boner. Here. Bouchard. Here. Case. Present. Cooper. Here. Driscoll.
Excuse.
Ellis. Present. French. Here. Murphy. Here. Guru. Hicks.
Excused.
Hutchings. Here. James. Here. Kinski.
Here.
Cole.
Present.
Cost.
Here.
Landon.
Here.
McEwen.
Here.
Nethercott. Pappas. Excused, Mr. President.
Excused.
Perkins. Rothfuss.
Here.
Salazar. Schuler. Scott.
Here.
Steinmetz. Here. Wasserberger.
Here.
Driscoll excused.
Excused.
Guru excused.
Excused.
Hicks
Excused.
excused. Nethercott.
Excused.
Perkins.
Excused.
President Dockstader.
Here.
24 present, 6 excused.
Prayer by Pastor Sean Sells.
Father, we're honored to be able to be here today, to be able to bring our prayers to you. Lord, you are a God who is deserving of all of our prayers, all of our worship. Father, you're a God to be honored, and we're so thankful for that. And Father, we do pray, or I pray for myself personally, I pray for your kingdom to come. But in the meantime, this is the kingdom we have. And we have an amazing system where we, the people, are involved in the leadership of this kingdom. Lord, I pray that you would give us wisdom, that you would give us direction. I pray for each of these senators that you would give them a knowledge of how to accomplish the things of your will. Lord, I know each one of them has needs of the day. I pray that you would provide for those needs. Lord, I pray that you would help us all to see that one of our needs is forgiveness, to be forgiven and to forgive others. Lord, I pray that you would lead us away from temptation, that you would, through this body and other governmental processes, that you would allow our government to be a barrier against evil in this world. Father, we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Senator Cooper, would you lead us in the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Play ball.
Will the reading clerk please read the Journal Committee report?
Mr. President, your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of March 9, 2022 has been read and recommends it be approved. Senator Kolb, Chairman.
Any objections? There being none, the report is adopted. Of course, Pastor Sells, our chaplain of the day, our nurse Jennifer James. Today in Wyoming history, Union Pacific shareholders resolved to erect the Ames Monument between Laramie and Cheyenne in honor of Oakes Ames and Oliver Ames Jr., two Union Pacific financiers. Okay, quote for the day, George Washington, "We must consult our means rather than our wishes." Session status, last day for third reading on bills in the second house. Signing when enrolled acts. Each signature takes you closer to home. Enrolled Act number 36, please read it in.
Senate Enrolled Act number 36, being original Senate File 11, an act relating to a state flag.
About to sign Enrolled Act number 36, the same being Senate File 11. There you go, Senator Anderson. Did you have a privilege? Did you have a privilege? Enrolled Act number 37, read it in. You don't want that one, do you? There you go.
Senate Enrolled Act Number 37, being original Senate File 101, an act relating to public health and safety.
About to sign. Enrolled Act number 37, the same being Senate File 101. Signed. Enrolled Act number 38, read it in.
Senate Enrolled Act Number 38, being original Senate File 41, an act relating to the administration of government.
Thank you. About to sign. Enrolled Act number 38, the same being Senate File 41. So signed. Enrolled Act number 39.
Senate Enrolled Act Number 39, being original Senate File 8, an act relating to weed and pest control.
About to sign. Enrolled Act number 39, the same being Senate File 8. So signed. Enrolled Act number 40, read it in.
Senate Enrolled Act Number 40, being original Senate File 80, an act relating to water development projects.
About to sign. Enrolled Act number 40, the same being Senate File 80. So signed. Enrolled Act number 41, read it in.
Senate Enrolled Act Number 41, being original Senate File 35, an act relating to public utilities.
About to sign. Enrolled Act number 41, the same being Senate File 35. So signed. Messages from the House.
From the House of Representatives, March 9, 2022, message number 270. Mr. President, the House adopted Joint Conference Committee Number 1 report on House Bill Number 3, state land leases. Ayes 56, noes 2, excused 2. Message number 271, March 9, 2022. Mr. President, the House adopted Joint Conference Committee Number 1 on Senate File 35, electric vehicle charging stations regulation exemption. Ayes 57, excused 2. Signed, Wendy Harding, House Chief Clerk.
Concurrences, Senate File 102. Senator Hicks, are you ready with message 269?
Mr. President, I move for concurrence.
Let's have him read it in.
Oh,
Just
read
check
it
to see
in,
if you're
please,
ready.
Mr.
Go ahead and read
President.
it in.
Message number 269, referencing Senate File 102, Second Amendment Protection Act.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. President, I move for concurrence on message number 269, which is the original Senate File 102, Second Amendment Preservation Act. Mr. President, for the most part, our colleagues down in their house just brought in some language that was flagged by LSO. More cleanup. The only substantive differences that are left out here, they did include in page 1, line 1, after firearms, they included firearm accessories, magazines, and ammunition. Mr. Chairman, that was the only changes. It doesn't change the intent of the bill, just provides a little for clarification if there was any unconstitutional acts that would infringe upon accessories, magazines, or ammunitions. It clarifies that. So I would ask for an yea vote, a vote, yes vote, vote yes on concurrence, Mr. President.
Thank you. Motion is that the Senate do concur on Senate File 102. And vote aye. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Concurrence vote, Senate File 102, roll call. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Beitman? No. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? No. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? No. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks?
Aye.
Aye. Hutchings? Aye. James? No. Kinski? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Cost? Aye. Landon? Aye. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas excused. Perkins?
Aye.
Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. Wasserberger? Aye. President Dockstetter? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 102, 22 aye, 7 no, 1 excused.
By your vote, you have concurred with the House amendments on Senate File 102.
Thank you, Mr. President. Privilege of the floor.
Please do.
Good senators, we have with us directly in front of us in the gallery here the wonderful, brilliant, and intelligent children of the 6th grade class of Albin Elementary School. Albin Elementary has been recognized as a Blue Ribbon School and twice recognized as a nationally distinguished Title I school. This track record is evidence that your investment in education is paying off. These students show impressive gains during each school year and have met or exceeded state expectations for more than 10 consecutive years. Albin is a town about 35 miles northeast here of Cheyenne, here in your Laramie County. These children are beautiful, and they are here with their teachers, Tracy Pelch, Chris Nussbaum, Kayla Werner, and Principal Dr. Smith. Please give them a warm Senate welcome.
Thank you and welcome to the Senate. Let's go to Joint Conference Committee reports. Senator Boner. Okay, ready? Read it in, please.
Message number 241, referencing House Bill 3, state land leases.
Senator Boner, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Joint Conference Committee Report Number 1 for Senate File 3, House Bill 3, and ask for the body's favorable consideration. Mr. President, what we did here, this is dealing with vacant land leases, and the fundamental discussion we had with our colleagues down the hall was how much discretion to give the board, how much direction to give them when it comes to determining whether a preference will exist for these vacant land leases. So what we went ahead and did is we allowed the board to still have some discretion, the Board of Land Commissioners to have some discretion, but also made sure that if they're not going to acknowledge a preference, which is set by the statute, that they give a good reason for doing so. And you'll see that exact language, that additional paragraph on your conference committee report. They have to issue written notice as to why they're not giving the preference, and have to give a reason why, and it's subject to appeal under our Administrative Procedures Act. So we're just setting the rules. Obviously, we want the preference to be meaningful, but we also acknowledge that the board does need some discretion. So this is the balance we came up with that makes everybody happy, including our colleagues down the hall. So go ahead and vote aye.
Okay. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Motion is the Senate do adopt the Joint Conference Committee report, message 241 and House Bill 3, and vote aye. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Joint Conference Committee Report Number 1 to House Bill 3, roll call. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll, conflict? Conflict, thank you. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Garou? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. James? Aye. Kinski? Aye. Cole? Aye. Cost? Aye. Landon? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas excused. Perkins? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott, conflict? Thank you. Conflict. Steinmetz? Aye. Wasserberger? Aye. President Dockstetter? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. House Bill 3, 25 aye, 2 no, 1 excused, and 2 conflict.
By your vote, you've agreed to adopt the Joint Conference Committee report on House Bill 3, that's Senate Message 241. Bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, do you have a consent list?
We do, Mr. President. I move third reading consent list, which is follows. House Bill 44, mobile home and vehicle titles and transfers. House Bill 53, military department, discrimination or harassment grievances. House Bill 64, vehicle service contracts. House Bill 73, omnibus water bill, planning. House Bill 91, county officers, salaries. House Bill 96, state officials' salary. House Bill 107, water state revolving funds amendments.
Would anyone like any of these bills removed from the list? Anyone like any of these bills moved from the list? Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? House Bill 44, mobile home and vehicle titles and transfers. House Bill 53, military department discrimination or harassment grievances. House Bill 64, vehicle service contracts. House Bill 73, omnibus water bill planning. House Bill 91, county officers' salaries. House Bill 96, state officials' salary. House Bill 107, water state revolving funds amendment. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
On the consent list, Anderson? Baldwin? Beitman? Boner? Bouchard? Case? Cooper? Driscoll? Ellis? French? Murphy? Guru? Hicks? Hutchings? James? Kinski? Kolb? Cost? Landon? McEwen? Nethercott? Pappas excused. Perkins? Rothfuss? Salazar? Schuler? Scott? Steinmetz? Wasserberger? President Dockstader. On the consent list, 29 aye, 1 excused. House Bill 44, are there any changes? Nethercott, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. House Bill 44, 28 aye, 1 no, and 1 excused. House Bill 53, are there any changes? Bouchard, aye to no. Hicks, aye to no. Beitman, no. James, no. Steinmetz, no. Kinski, no. French, no. Kolb, aye to no. McEwen, aye to no. Boner, aye to no. Salazar, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. House Bill 53, 18 aye, 11 no, 1 excused. House Bill 64, are there any changes? Beitman, no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. House Bill 64, 28 aye, 1 no, 1 excused. House Bill 73, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. House Bill 73, 29 aye, 1 excused. House Bill 91, are there any changes? Hutchings? Aye to no. Bouchard? Aye to no. Case? Aye to no. Beitman? Aye to no. Salazar? No. James? No. Kolb? No. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. House Bill 91, 22 aye, 7 no, 1 excused. House Bill 96, are there any changes? James, no. Beitman, no. Salazar, no. Hutchings, no. McEwen, no. Richard, no. Boner, no. Case, aye to no. Kolb, aye to no. French, aye to no. Dockstetter, no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. House Bill 96, 18 aye, 11 no, 1 excused. House Bill 107, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. House Bill 107, 29 aye, 1 excused.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, House Bills 44, 53, 64, 73, 91, 96, and 107 have passed the Senate. Bills on third reading, House Bill 92, read it in, please.
House Bill 92, Abortion Prohibition Supreme Court Decision, sponsored by Representative Rodriguez-Williams, an act relating to abortion.
There's an amendment, read it in.
House Bill 92, third reading amendment number 1, delete.
Senator Kolb.
Mr. President, I wish to withdraw the amendment.
Absent objection, third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 92 has been withdrawn. There's an amendment, another one, read it in.
House Bill 92, third reading amendment number 2, page 1, line 4, delete.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move third reading amendment to House Bill 92 and ask for your favorable consideration. Thanking the good Senator of Laramie County for coming up with some verbiage that she thought would help the bill in that area where she was in doubt. We go in and delete the Attorney General and insert the governor on pages 1, and on page 2, we do the same. We add that the governor, upon the advice of the Attorney General, forgot the wording, just a second. He certifies whatever the Attorney General told him to the Secretary of State. And then on page 4, we delete the Attorney General. And that's pretty much it. It's just pretty much cleaning it up, making it a little tighter and acceptable. And again, I ask for your aye vote.
This is on third reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 92. Any discussion? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. Back on the bill.
Question?
Question being called, House Bill Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a really important issue, and it's not right that we would let this go by without talking about it some more. We just begun, as you recall, Mr. President, on first reading, committee of the whole, nobody spoke, we had other things. Second reading, we had a pretty good debate, but I felt like we left it unfinished. And I would hope that we could continue that good debate from second reading. I'm particularly interested, Mr. President, about the vagueness of this legislation that is triggered by a Supreme Court decision. But all it says, Mr. President, is about that Supreme Court decision overruling a previous doctrine. And that sounds like it's going to be black or white. They're either going to rule this way or they're not. Rock Springs Tigers are either going to win the game or they're going to lose the game to the Kelly Walsh Trojans, or Natrona County Trojans. I want to get that right. It's not like that. It's not like that. Yeah, it's the Mustangs are Natrona County. We want to be sure with our references because the vagueness will kill us. Because, Mr. President, we don't know what that Supreme Court decision is going to say. It may have restrictions. It may have no restrictions. But we are tailoring our policy towards that. And it's a very important discussion because this affects the welfare of women and families in Wyoming, Mr. President. Make no mistake about this. This bill tells women what they have to do with their bodies. It's a form of bondage, Mr. President, to have the state be in control of these very intimate, personal, private decisions. So this is a very big step. And all we're doing with this bill is saying, okay, the Supreme Court's going to rule and it's going to magically take over and be the basis for Wyoming law. And we don't even know how that Supreme Court's going to rule. Mr. President, it's not going to be a black or white decision. And I hope that we won't pretend like everything is black or white. We won't pretend like the servitude of women doesn't matter. And we will stand up and we will not pass this bill.
Question. House Bill 92 having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? The chief clerk will call the roll, please.
House Bill 92, third reading roll call. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? No. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Case?
No.
No. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? James? Aye. Kinski? Aye. Colt? Aye. Cost? Aye. Landon? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas excused. Perkins? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? No. Steinmetz? Aye. Wasserberger? Aye. President Dockstader? Aye. Perkins, no to aye. Baldwin, no to aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. House Bill 92, 24 aye, 5 no, 1 excused.
House Bill 92, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, House Bill 92 has passed the Senate. House Bill 105, please read it in.
House Bill 105, Severance Tax Reduction, Coal, sponsored by Representative Hallinan, an act relating to taxation and revenue.
Here's an amendment. Please read it in.
House Bill 105, third reading amendment number 1, page 1, line 2, after.
Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 105. Ask the body to vote aye. Mr. Chairman, this looks a little odd, but the very first line of the title of this bill says an act related to taxation and revenue. What this does is in an earlier legislation that passed through here, we created a trust that they could, so for coal companies and others to do this very thing. What this says is that on or after July 1st of 2022, which is the effective date of when this trust goes into effect, that's already passed through both houses, a taxpayer who is a surface coal miner and operators and subject to the taxes in this article may elect, so it's their choice. They can do it if they want to. They don't have to do it if they don't want to. Elect to remit to the department an amount equal to an additional 0.5% of the value of the gross product of surface of coal in the state that taxpayers extracted or severed for deposit into the voluntary assigned trust that was created by earlier legislation. So what this does is simply says, you're paying this 0.5% and you're going to get this tax break. If you want, you may take that and put it into that trust against your reclamation obligation. If you do that, then that's where the money goes. Or you can take it and put it in your pocket or give it to the railroad or give it to the shareholders, the ratepayers, whoever's going to get the benefit of that. But if they want, they can take this and put it in that trust account. What that does, Mr. President, is when you put it in that trust account, it's a down payment against their reclamation obligation. Right now, these coal companies are out and they've got a bond. I think they've got to have bond up to 90% of their obligation, reclamation obligation. And the purpose of this trust account is if they want to start making deposits against that, then that's held and it reduces their bond amount, which then helps their balance sheet. And so it makes them look stronger financially. They're prepaying a sinking fund against an eventual reclamation obligation that they'll have when the mine closes. It's completely voluntary. If they want to pocket this, or whoever pockets this 0.5%, that happens. If they want to deposit here, they can put it there. It's up to them. Ask your favorable consideration. Would stand to answer any questions.
Discussion on the amendment. Senator Wasserberger.
Unfortunately, I rise, Mr. President. I don't understand how this is germane to the bill, and I'm not necessarily against this amendment. I just don't see how it fits. And if you look at the title, we're inserting trust. Essentially, this is about severance taxes, and the other part of it is since I don't believe it's germane to the bill, this would have to extend to trona, bentonite, and uranium, and that's not doable in this bill. And Mr. President, I would ask for a ruling as to whether or not this is germane.
Senator Perkins.
On the point of order. So if you look again, it's a bill. The bill says an act related to taxation and revenue, and so that's what the opening line is. This is simply saying this has to do with the tax. It says, and it doesn't relate to everybody. Taxpayer who is a surface coal operator, so it's only surface coal operators, says that they can elect to have an additional 0.5%. So the 0.5% break that they're getting here, if they want, they can direct that 0.5% to somewhere else. As again, it's a voluntary, but it's directly to do with taxation because you're saying they're able to direct what they want to do with this 0.5% severance tax cut.
Thank you. Senator Wasserberger, appreciate your concern looking at that. That cuts a pretty wide path. I'm going to rule that it is germane. Go ahead. Any further?
In favor of it.
Okay, thank you. All right, Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, for the amendment, we had a lot of work put into the trust so that the industries could put money aside and decrease their bonding. This is a great way to do it. I'm all for this amendment. Please vote aye.
Senator Bidman.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and against, I just would push back a little bit. This is a third reading amendment. It came really late in the process. We're one vote away from having a clean bill pass both chambers without amendments. And I would urge you to, kind of push back on this and vote no. My question to the bringer is, can they do this anyway without this amendment? Can they put in extra money into this voluntary assigned trust if they so chose? Why do we need this amendment? Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, before we go back to the sponsor, any further questions? Let's go back to Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. So going back, this voluntary trust that's been created is just as the chairman of Minerals spoke about. This is their 0.5%. If this bill passes, this is their 0.5%. Why do we care what they do with it? If they want to put it in this trust, they can. If they don't want to put it in the trust, they can keep it. That's simple. Please vote aye.
Okay, question being called. This is on third reading, amendment number 1 to House Bill 105. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. No. Amendment's passed. Back on the bill. House Bill 105. Senator Case? Oh, I had two of them up. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Well, this is a bill about Wyoming's future, Mr. President. And we had a bill yesterday where we were struggling to fund something that was going to be important, something to establish an endowment, $10 million endowment that was going to pay dividends and put Wyoming people that are returning to college to pay for their education and help us as we go through transition in Wyoming. Well, believe me, if there's ever an industry that's in transition, it's this one. It's not our doing. And we have strong feelings about the importance of this industry to our nation, to our electric utility grid, and to our state economy. But we're not in control. We are putting up a good fight, and I hope that in this fight, people will realize the importance of coal to our electrical grid. I think Germany's realizing it right now, I might add. But Mr. President, that coal doesn't really belong to us. That belongs to the future generations of Wyoming. But it is a collapsing future in some sense. Because when I started in this legislature, the mantra was that we had a 500-year supply of wonderful energy for our country, and that Wyoming's future, Wyoming's tomorrow, was assured because of that 500-year supply. You know, they say we didn't leave the age of horse and buggy because we ran out of horses and buggies. We didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. We're about to leave the coal age because the world has changed. Because of global warming, concerns about that. And like it or not, our customers don't really want what we're going to sell. So we're wrapping this up. It might be a 10-year transition. Maybe if this technology we talk about works with sequestration and the world kind of comes to their senses, maybe it'll be here for a long time. But Mr. President, we are in this transition. And the question is, how do we protect Wyoming's tomorrow as we go through this transition? I say take this money, take this $10 million a year for as long as the bonanza lasts, for as long as we have that last boom that we shouldn't lose or let fall away, Mr. President. Let's take that money. Let's use it for things like educating our children, building roads. Put it away in a way that makes it so we are protecting the future people that sit in this chair. This tax rebate or tax break, or whatever you want to call it, it's not going to save this coal industry. It will not do anything but reduce the amount of resources available financially for the future people that it will be in Wyoming and will sit in this room. It makes no sense. It will not change the amount of electricity generated with coal. It will not change the amount of coal mined. It will not change the number of jobs in the industry. It will not change any of that. It will only change how we protect the future. Thank you. On and against.
Further discussion on the bill, Senator Wasberger.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of House Bill 105. Mr. President, you would be hard-pressed to find an industry in this country operating under the current heavy tax burden that Wyoming coal industry operates under every day. A severance tax reduction from 7% to 6.5% would improve competitiveness by moving closer to parity with natural gas, which we tax at 6%. Fundamentally, the benefit of reducing the tax would be to make coal more competitive against other fuels and generation options, especially when natural gas prices are low. An incremental 50 cents can make the difference between when a coal plant dispatches and when it does not. It will help allow Wyoming coal operations to reinvest in equipment needed to mine coal, purchase needed haul trucks and drag lines, implement reclamation management, and maintain a workforce. And most of our mines are hiring, Mr. President. One mine manager told me just this past weekend that operating costs are up roughly 10% in this quarter alone, and as we know, they keep rising. Reduction in taxes will help operators mitigate these costs in Wyoming, whether it is purchasing fabricated parts and supplies in Gillette, a haul bed truck in Mills, or various services from around our state. While spot prices for coal are currently higher than usual, they are falling, Mr. President, and I believe they fell $4.60 per ton this week. Very little coal is being sold on the spot market as available coal in the Powder River Basin has largely been contracted for 2022 and 2023. Allowing companies to have more capital in their coffers will help the industry take advantage of a current coal market cycle that is increasingly strong. We are all aware of the federal efforts to hamstring the industry and its customers in the utility sector. The federal war on fossil fuels will continue under this current administration. While the Build Back Better plan appears to have failed, I am very concerned of the efforts to revive parts of it either legislatively or administratively. There is an ongoing concerted effort to keep our coal in the ground as the war on fossil fuels continues. We don't expect the current administration to ease pressure on coal just because their plan failed legislatively. Currently, the Department of Interior is conducting a full-scale review of the BLM federal coal lease bonusing program as part of the President's executive order. It is reasonable to expect the current administration will attempt to use regulations to implement these policies that have thus far failed in Congress. A severance tax reduction will provide breathing room and cash flow that will allow for a better long-term mine planning and investment in the state. Every dollar saved will help the Wyoming coal industry withstand the ongoing pressure from Washington that we know will not stop until at the earliest the next election. And Mr. President, let's look at this bill for what it really is. This bill is a thank you note. It's a thank you note to the 5,000 miners that get up every day, grab their lunch pail, and brave the Coal Miner 500 and go to work. We're saying thank you to an industry that provided $555 million in fiscal year 2020 to this state. This industry has built this state's schools, and we're proud of that. This industry provides millions and millions of dollars to us here on our floor. And so I say to you, Mr. President, let's thank our miners with this bill. Mr. President, we keep the lights on.
Thank you. Senator Rompus.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on and against the bill, we all value and thank the contributions to the state of Wyoming by the coal industry over the last 5 decades and longer. We know that it has built our schools. It has paid for most of the operations or a substantial portion of the operations of our education system for many years, year in, year out. But that doesn't make this a good policy decision. That is true, but this isn't a good policy decision. And my concern, Mr. President, is that these dollars are not going to go to those 5,000 miners. If this were a bill that said $2,000 checks to 5,000 miners in Wyoming, above and beyond what they already receive, if that were the nuance of this bill, that would be a reward to our miners. If we had any confidence that this would be new investment in the state of Wyoming, $10 million of new investment in industry in this state, bringing people back to work, buying new equipment, then we can see that there would be justification because there would be a return for these people that have worked hard. Many of these industries, many of these companies have exit strategies from Wyoming. We know this. It's in their press releases, it's in their annual plans. Not all of them, but many of them. They'll be receiving this, and it will help them to expedite those plans to leave the state of Wyoming and shift to metallurgical coal. That's what we're paying for here. They're honest about that. That's not some backroom discussion. That's their projections. When they get on their earnings call, what are you doing in the future? Shifting to a more profitable industry somewhere else. Again, to be clear, that's not all of them. But this doesn't just go to the ones that are sticking around. If we wanted to try and ensure that this was invested in the state of Wyoming, we could have done that. We can still do that next year. If we wanted to know what the true implications of this were from an economic analysis standpoint, we could have done that. The testimony we've heard, Mr. President, is that this is the fourth year this bill has come, and no new answers have come as to how these funds would be used. I feel like I've asked that question several times in the past, but there are no new answers. There's no reason to believe, Mr. President, that this will help the industry, that this will change the economics, that this will change supply, this will change demand, this will change earnings, this will change revenue for the employees, or what I value, and I know each of you value, whether this will help the people of Wyoming, and in particular those that are employed in this sector, to keep their jobs, to keep their benefits, under a circumstance where one of these companies goes bankrupt, which we've seen in recent years, and most of the benefits were severed, while folks out of state still profited. Those are the types of things, Mr. President, that we could protect against. If it's the will of this body to provide $10 million to this industry to support the people that work in that industry in this state, we can do that. I'd be on board with that. Jobs training programs, new equipment, new salaries, transition costs, funding the concept of the amendment, where we're looking for ways to bolster their investment in the remediation. Those are all good ways to invest in the people of Wyoming. This is irreversible. We're not going to come back and fix this. This is not about equity. This is not about equity. You see in the very page of the bill that underground coal pays 3.75% for their severance tax. We know that anything in the other category of minerals, which would include rare earths, gravel, CO2, 2%. It's all over the map. Nobody's talking about raising those. That would be an equitable bill. The end result of this, Mr. President, is going to be to hand $10 million per year for as long as we continue to have significant coal operations in the state of Wyoming back to an industry that's trying to get itself, for the most part, out of thermal coal because they see the writing on the wall. And we're going to facilitate and pay for that transition. Mr. President, on against the bill.
Senator Bateman.
Thank you, Mr. President. on in support of the bill, and I disagree with my friend from the ivory tower. This is good tax policy. It's good policy because we're dealing with equity. We're dealing with unfair competition. Right now, we are one of the highest severance tax rates in the nation on surface coal at 7%. And their strongest competitor, their number one competitor, natural gas, is taxed at 6%. It's not fair. And the Taxpayers Association put out an email this morning. I'm sure you all saw it. They support this bill because it's justified. It is equitable. It's stable and it's transparent. It's time we help our coal industry out, Mr. President. As my good friend from Camel Country said, 500 plus million a year in tax revenue is what the industry brings to our state, so we can spend it to our heart's content. And boy, do we spend it, Mr. President. We're asking for $10 million, that's it. And we're asking for fairness, one step closer to equity with natural gas so they can continue to compete. This is a tax policy issue, and this is the right thing to do, and I urge and I vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Ready for the question? Back to Senator Hicks, and then I think Senator Case was up.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm neither going to speak for or against the amendment, but I just want to provide a little bit of clarification. And so right now in your budget, you have $100 million set aside to look at carbon capture that would specifically go to keeping coal miners working in the state of Wyoming. That's what we have that in that energy policy. There is reserved right now to do that, to look at carbon capture, which is designed to continue to burn coal at a power plant in the state of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, we've got millions of dollars sitting in an account and have pursued litigation. That was coal money that the state used to pursue litigation for coal port exports. Mr. Chairman, I'm reminded of a budget here just a year ago where we put significant revenues into the School of Energy Resources for coal to fertilizer, coal to pavement, flameless pressurized oxygen, combustion. Mr. Chairman, we use these revenues and invest them back into our coal industry in just about every budget that I've been down here for the last 6 years. So it's not like this money is not going back to the very purpose that we're trying to do here, is keep our coal industry viable in the state of Wyoming, Mr. President. We are trying to protect coal. We've also created this thing called the ITS, Integrated Test Center up there, that was largely paid with coal revenue to continue to be able to do coal mining and coal-fired generation. Mr. Chairman, we have made hundreds of millions of dollars of investment into coal in this state, and we will continue to do that, Mr. Chairman. So you can say these taxes may be going to the general cost of government, but I think I can sit down and show you they have been a significant investment in litigation in every aspect to continue to produce coal in this state. And that commitment is unwavering, Mr. Chairman. So just for a little edification for the body, consider neither for or against the amendment, but just getting that information out there.
Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you. Just to add on to what the Vice President has pointed out, and by the way, I'm really struggling with this one. We have service industries down in my neck of the woods that support that industry, and I've always tried to do everything I could to be supportive. You know, I would just remind everybody, we always keep hammering the point that many of these schools that we've been able to build came on the backs of coal. Well, ironically, a handful of those schools are right there in Campbell County, along with the huge water project that these companies did not have to pay any tax for. That coal severance money has gone to that kind of use. We built a brand new high school up there that they don't have to pay off a bond. we've really supported this industry. And you learn that when you're on the Appropriations Committee that the Vice President is right. When you take this kind of money out of the coffers, you're not only taking away that 10 million, you're taking away 5, 10, 15 years of compounded interest. It could go to what? Well, maybe to the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, additional, which we decide just about every single budget, we put additional monies into that permanent fund, which benefit everything else. I'm going to listen some more, Mr. President. I'm really struggling on this bill. Thank you.
Any more discussion? Senator Grew?
Thank you, Mr. President. Business is business, and I'm a business person. Talked a lot on this floor about economic diversification. Sometimes we listen, sometimes I don't think we do. I think we should change our tax policy. I think we should change our tax structure. Don't think we will anytime soon. Bring up bills, we shoot them down. But business is business. Coal is business. I don't like some of the rhetoric I hear about administrations and what they do. I think we got a problem, and the problem is we got a product that people don't want to buy right now. Business is business. It's the way it works. Businesses come, businesses go. It's how they evolve. Whale oil. How much whale oil you bought lately? It used to be a big deal. In the Northeast, they hung on to it for years. Business is business. Today, we're asked to cut a tax. I wish we'd switch and raise taxes on other things. We spend money and we try to repurpose coal and repurpose it to do other things, and I think we'll get there. But today, business is business. I'm going to be voting for this bill today because I believe someone has to kind of change the paradigm a little bit and say, okay, I'll stand with you today. Maybe you'll stand with me another day or another time when we're talking about it, because business is business. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Let's go to Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in favor of this bill. I think it's the right thing to do. Our industry, coal industry, has built a lot of this state. I think this is an opportunity that when the coal company gets this break, that they can do things in our community. I know they're going to do more than just that, but this is an opportunity to see just what that's going to be. I think they deserve a chance. They deserve the opportunity. And we have, frankly, an industry that's powered the nation. And I'd like to also say, when we get off the, this government subsidized renewable energy track, we're going to come to find out we need sustainable, reliable power generation. It's going to be a combination of things, but we're not going to do it with renewables. That's an unsupported dream by the government, the federal government, to support this. We need power. We need reliable power. And we have in Wyoming a lot of these minerals and the abilities to produce that. And I like to give our coal companies a chance. They've certainly done a heck of a lot for our state, and I like to give them a little bit back and see what they can do for us. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Case, I see you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I think there's a good point that was made earlier by some of my colleagues on the other side about natural gas being kind of important in this mix, and that we maybe should be looking at comparing the tax rate on natural gas to the tax rate on coal. So let's talk about that a little bit, Mr. President. You know, the decline in natural gas has been as big as the decline in coal, roughly over the same time period. And it is very true that high natural gas prices helped to drive both better revenues for Wyoming last year, but also to revitalize the coal industry in a very significant way. We mentioned how the largest coal company had fourth quarter profits of $541 million, not revenues, profits. But back to the natural gas issue, Mr. President, if it were true that Wyoming coal competes with Wyoming natural gas everywhere across the country for power generation, there would be an element, a germ of truth in that argument. But the real truth is, it's Wyoming coal against other people's gas. People that don't have taxes on their gas. It's not our severance tax gas against our severance tax coal. Now, there's going to be exceptions. There are going to be some gas-fired power plants that do run on Wyoming natural gas, Mr. President. But most of the natural gas-fired power plants in the United States of America do not use Wyoming gas. They're not affected by that amount of taxation that Wyoming puts on its gas. They're not even in the same markets. So, Mr. President, I think that's a bit of a fallacy. Return to the fact that as this industry is going in transition, Wyoming has stood up for it, invested in carbon sequestration, invested in job training, invested in keeping ports open, invested in litigation. We're on it. I'm with every one of us, stand tall on that. On the margin, this will not change anything about how much coal is burned, what the price of natural gas will be, and the relevant choices to run power plants across the United States of America. That's why we're just giving the money away at a time when we desperately need that money because we have not had sustained tax reform, and we have not done an adequate job of planning for the future. Biggest crisis this country's ever seen, the biggest movements in terms of greenhouse gases and protecting the environment have occurred on our watch. And we haven't done anything yet, really. The biggest loss of mineral revenues in our history have occurred in less than the past decade. And we haven't done anything except for to enjoy temporary funding from the federal government that take us away our focus on what we should be doing. Against this bill, we need this money, Mr. President. The future is not right.
We're going to go with Wasserberger, Anderson in that order. Senator Wasserberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For my second time, I would like to state some of the comments that were made about building schools in Campbell County and the high school that was built there. If you remember, Campbell County actually built South Campus, and then we added on to it to make it a high school. And we used co-lease bonus funds from Campbell County. And then it was mentioned that the $240 million water project was paid for by the state. I think, if I remember correctly, the local community paid a substantial portion of that, I think as much as 50%, and that was paid for by sales tax that we passed to pay for it. And the vast majority of sales tax in our community is paid for by the mining industry, because when they buy a $10 million haul truck, that's a lot of sales tax. And also, I think we used AML money for that project. What does AML stand for? It stands for Abandoned Mine Lands, which comes off of coal. And then lastly, a short report on the ITC Center. The pandemic has really raised havoc with the ITC, but we have $100 million worth of projects ready to come into that test facility. And we are able to say about Dry Fork Mine that it is a zero emissions plant if we can pull the CO2 off and use it to build other things. And the most productive thing that the ITC Center is looking at with CO2 is actually making concrete much harder. And so I just wanted to point those things out. Yes, this legislature has helped Campbell County many times, but a lot of that money came from Campbell County too. So I ask you to vote aye on this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Anderson.
Neither on or for the bill or against it. One thing I'd like to remind the body that the taxes that were paid were not benevolent society kind of payments. It was paid because this body decided how much they were going to tax all the industries, whether it's coal, oil, or gas. This body decided how much they're going to tax them. Then this body also decided where they're going to spend that money. So that wasn't a direction from a coal company or an oil company about where we should spend that money. But this body made that decision and made good decisions with what they should do with the money. So when we talk about coal paid for that, it's kind of slapping in the face all of us that paid a lot of sales taxes in, and that money also went to those projects. But we don't hear anybody talking about sales taxes and how much money people paid in sales taxes. But it's all into a general fund, and then this body decides. So don't think that those funds were paid into here by some contributor like somebody who built libraries all over the United States. Those funds were paid because this body decided to have them pay that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President, for my second time. I think there's good discussion here and a lot of very good points. And I think there's a suggestion that we're not doing right by our coal industry and that somehow there's inequity. And if that really is the problem, honestly, my concern, my core concern, is the revenue and maintaining revenue. And we've been talking for years about trying to diversify our revenue structure in a way that we stop relying so heavily on coal, oil, and gas. I've supported that. Honestly, if this bill had a matching increase in an undertaxed sector like engineers, for example, if we were raising money off of professional services sector or the attorneys, that offset this $10 million, and I didn't see a revenue decrease, then I'm going to be on board with the fairness concept. There are plenty of pieces of legislation that accomplish this objective that I could sign on to, trying to get to equity, if that's the true importance. That would also incorporate, though, increasing some severance tax, where not so long ago we reduced one industry down to about 0% severance tax with an expectation that that would help the industry and turn them around. With that particular industry, we have seen zero turnaround. We took them to 0% severance tax with a discussion and an assurance that everything would be better. It didn't help the industry, didn't help the state. We don't have any alternatives. This is a hard path to go down, because what this does, if we make a mistake here, is put an obligation on a future legislature to raise the taxes back up. And if we think it's hard to have this discussion, we know it's hard to have the discussion of trying to increase taxes where we need it. Mr. President, there was a tremendous amount of courage by some of the people that we see throughout the chamber with their pictures hanging on the wall. Back in the 70s, they made courageous decisions. And those courageous decisions that they made at that time have generated a tremendous amount of revenue for the state. They're the ones that made the hard choices that led to the payment of the schools, because these resources that are being extracted, that are being severed, are under the state of Wyoming. And that's an important concept. As was pointed out by a recent speaker, this isn't a handout through generosity by these industries. Let's be honest, if the tax rate were zero, we'd be getting zero. They wouldn't be making contributions of this order of magnitude. It is the policy set by this body and the courageous decisions made by previous legislators to keep the lights on for the state that we have to take into consideration as well. I understand the challenge of this decision. I understand every time we bring a tax cut in here, there is a constituency that supports the heck out of that tax cut. And it's easy for us to vote for that because in the short term, we get pats on the back and we get thank yous. But in the long run, it just makes life more difficult for future legislatures that have to deal with our budget deficits of the future and the fact that we've done very little in recent years to modernize our tax structure. If we want to reduce these tax rates, let's do it. But let's do it through a comprehensive tax reform that recognizes that we're overtaxing the minerals industry, which is true, but we're simultaneously dramatically undertaxing most of the rest of the industries in the state, Mr. President, on and against.
Further discussion on House Bill 105, further discussion, ready for the question being called. House Bill 105 having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? The chief clerk will call the roll.
House Bill 105, third reading roll call. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? No. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. James? Aye. Kinski? No. Cole? Aye. Cost? Aye. Landon? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas excused. Perkins? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? No. Steinmetz? Aye. Wasserberger? Aye. President Dockstetter? Aye. Kinski, no to aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. House Bill 105, 25 aye, 4 no, 1 excused.
House Bill 105, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, House Bill 105 has passed the Senate. House Bill 131, third reading of the House bill. Please read it in.
House Bill 131 engrossed nuclear power generation and storage amendments, sponsored by Representative Burkhart, an act relating to environmental quality.
There is an amendment. Please read it in.
House Bill 131, third reading amendment number 1 to engrossed copy, page 1, line 10, delete.
All right. Third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 131, Senator Case.
Mr. President, Senator French has been trying to get your attention.
Oh,
I'm happy to
Senator
wait.
French. Well, we're going to let you slip in if that's okay. Senator French?
Yeah, privilege of the floor.
Please do.
Folks, above the president is a friend of my wife and I, Nina Weber. She's very active in state politics and in politics in the Republican Party up in Park County. And I guarantee you, one of these days, she will be in the other side or right here. She's very good at what she does. Would you please welcome her?
Let's continue. Senator Case, we are on third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 131.
Don't seem to have agreement. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 131. Mr. President, this piece deals with 2 things. This amendment deals with the tax rate. We had discussion yesterday. You remember this whole section in this paragraph is a credit against the existing statute, which has a $5 per megawatt tax rate. Yesterday, we discussed a $3 credit, meaning a net tax of 2. What this does, Mr. President, is take it down 1 more. So this would be a net tax of $1 per megawatt. In addition, there's a little bit of a reporting requirement for the Department of Revenue to tell us about the effects of this tax break. That's the amendment. If we were to pass it, just to slightly away, the next amendment just deals with the reporting requirement. So I would withdraw the next amendment if the reporting requirement and this amendment got in. So thank you, Mr. President. Happy to discuss. $1 megawatt hour.
Discussion, Senator Wasserberger.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. On and against the amendment, and a number of different reasons why, but I really think that the Joint Minerals Committee should look at this in the interim and come up with a tax structure that is fair to everyone. Setting a tax here is the wrong way to do this, and so I would urge the body to vote no.
Further discussion, further discussion? Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, on and against the amendment, it's just a redo of yesterday's, changes the dollar amount, all right, but I agree with the previous speaker. We need to look at this seriously in the interim and see what we do with the taxing of electrons from coal, oil, natural gas, nuclear, any sources. We need to look at what we're doing with wind, solar, et cetera, even hydrogen. So I like the idea of his interim study. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for the amendment. I think this gets us closer to where my constituents want to be. They feel like we're getting really nothing out of this deal other than being guinea pigs for a experimental nuclear plant that the electricity is not even going to benefit Wyoming. It's questionable as to how many jobs this is going to create. And at this rate, without this amendment, it's not really going to generate any tax revenue for us. So I think this is a good idea. I like the deal with the uranium happening to be sourced from the United States, hopefully Wyoming uranium. I think this gets us closer to where we need to be. So thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion? Let's go over to Senator Guru and then back to Senator Perkins.
Uninformed, Mr. President, thank you. Business is business. Vote aye.
Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, this one's a bit intriguing. You know, we had years ago when we started down the road with wind, we put a dollar tax, a megawatt tax, and we put it on based on what the nameplate capacity of the towers, and it was always supposed to be a holder, a placeholder for that. But over the years, we've had some discussions, and a couple of years ago, when I was the president of the Senate, I actually had a discussion with the I don't remember if I think he was the CEO at the time of the largest utility we have in the state, and he was in, and they were talking about the investments and the repowering that was going to happen all across the state on all these wind towers and all these blades and how much that was. And then we talked a little bit about taxation, and he was saying, please don't tax wind. He says, well, we're just making all these investments, please don't tax wind energy. And I asked him the question. I said, well, you know, that's interesting, because I think outside of Wyoming that you pay income tax, you pay a tax everywhere else. You pay an income tax. He said, well, we don't pay it in Washington. And I said, yeah, but you pay a gross receipts tax in Washington, which is another form of income tax. And he kind of said yes. And then I said, so, and then it hit me, and I said, so what you're telling us is don't tax the source, just tax electricity. And he got really quiet, and he kind of looked down, and then he kind of said, yeah. And you think about this, we've had this discussion about how electricity goes out. You know, we only consume about 19% of the electricity that we generate in this state, and the rest of it goes out, and it goes out there. And those utilities are paying, in the other places where they work, they're paying income taxes in those states based upon what they generate here and sell there. And so just following up on the good senator from Sheridan who just spoke, think about this. And whether we pass this bill or not, it's something that we need to look at. I can tell you that I think there, and somebody over from Lander who knows a whole lot about more about this than I do. And Mr. President, you've worked on this issue in the last few years too. I think there's about a $5 hit in an electricity rate. There's about a $5 a megawatt tax that you do without actually impacting rates because of those tax structures. So I'm not saying you increase that. I'm not even saying we do that. But I think whether you pass this or not, this is something that you have to look at about expanding the tax base, about recognizing that Wyoming at some point needs to quit being a colony and simply exporting raw materials and importing finished goods. That somehow one of the finished products that we ship out of the state, 80% of it that goes out of the state is electricity, and it's a finished product. And I don't know how we do that, but as we talk about tax bases in the future, it's an interesting discussion. And so whether you pass this or not, I mean, this is something that the state needs to explore as we talk about these things. It's not about raising more money so we can spend more. It's about what we've been talking about all day, is how do you keep the lights on? This government, the state government, love it or like it, does provide essential services. If you want roads, you want jails, you want prisons, you want courts, it takes money to run those things, and we have to figure out how to finance that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Kolb and then Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. President. On for the amendment. I think it's an issue that we have to grapple with. It went from $5 to $0. Well, what happened to anything in between? I think $1 seems to be a reasonable point to start. And at the very least, we need to look forward and have more discussion about how we tax these types of resources. I think it's what is fair. It's what is, I think, expected by at least constituents in my area. So it is a tax reduction, just to be clear. It's not an increase, it's a reduction from 5 to 1. And then on a physics note, it is no longer electrons. It is, in fact, magnetism on how they describe the flow of power. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Scott.
Mr. President, this is an interesting, speculative, almost academic exercise. Mr. President, I think whether you vote for this amendment or against this amendment isn't going to make any difference to our tax revenue anytime soon. If you want to tax this project and raise any near-term income, remember, this is destined for years of litigation based on the experience seen elsewhere in the country in recent years on nuclear projects. If you want to raise any tax revenue in any quick hurry on this one, you're going to have to tax attorney's fees.
You're here.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I think I started a theme there. I didn't mean to. Mr. President, if the body wants a fair tax, this is it. This is the right amendment. It gets it down to $1 per megawatt hour, which is again comparable to what we see for wind right now. I agree this is not the end solution. We really need to fundamentally rework the tax structure for all forms of power, electrical power production and sale, instead of having a hodgepodge approach where this contributes to the hodgepodge approach. But the concern I have is that we've known we needed that for as long as I've been in this chamber, and we don't have that. So what we have before us right now is a relatively fair approach that would lead to, quick calculation that I did was around $3 million a year-ish if it were operating, of revenue off of the reactor, somewhere in that ballpark. So certainly not going to solve all of our problems, but gets 30% of the way towards the last one. So with that, Mr. President, I think this is a pretty fair approach, and I think it's a reasonable amendment, recognizing there's a lot of work ahead to do a better job.
Question being called. We got a tax, we got an amount, better have a roll call. Roll call, please, Chief Clerk. This is third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 131.
Third reading amendment number 1, House Bill 131, roll call. Anderson? No. Baldwin? No. Beitman? Aye. Boner? No. Bouchard? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? No. Driscoll? No. Ellis? No. French? No. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? No. James? Aye. Kinski? No. Cole? Aye. Cost? No. Landon? No. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Happus excuse Perkins? No. Rothfuss?
Aye.
Aye. Salazar? No. Schuler? No. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. Wasserberger? No. President Dockstetter?
No.
No. Closing vote. Hicks, aye to no. Closing. Vote closed. On the amendment, 12 aye, 17 no, 1 excused.
By your vote, third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 131 has failed. Senator Case, read in third reading amendment number 2 to 131. Read it in, please.
House Bill 131, third reading amendment number 2 to engrossed copy, page 9, line 15, after.
Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would move third reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 131. All this is a reporting requirement. It requires the Department of Revenue to report to the Joint Revenue Interim Committee on the amount of taxes that were exempted under this subsection during the prior tax year. We've been implementing these reporting requirements as standard for all our tax exemptions, so we can get a handle on that. And that's all this does. It's a reporting requirement.
Discussion? Question being called. Third reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 131. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Nay. Ayes have it. Third reading amendment number 3 to House Bill 131. Please read it in.
House Bill 131, third reading amendment number 3 to engrossed copy, page 5, line 19, delete.
Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move third reading amendment number 3 to House Bill 131. This is following up on our discussion yesterday where we have talked about when the Industrial Siting Act should apply. And there was a lot of good discussion. We had an amendment that I withdrew because we seem to be getting together in a space that said that we want some parts of the Industrial Siting Act to apply, but we don't want to duplicate or try to get in the way of any National Regulatory Commission requirements. So that's what this does, Mr. President. So what it does is it goes into page 5. It's that little paragraph E, line 17 through 22. That's in that, if you look, it has existing language in the law, has the provision of the Industrial Development Information and Siting Act through and cites the statute shall apply, and there's new language in the bill that says only to the extent that those provisions do not interfere or contradict. This removes that word only, but adds modifying sentence to at the end of line 22, before the period after commission, it says that are related to the issuance of a permit for the construction and operation of the advanced nuclear reactor. So, and then there's a new paragraph. Notwithstanding this subsection, the Department of Revenue shall pay an impact assistance payment after construction of an advanced nuclear reactor in accordance with the Industrial Siting Act. So this does two things. It says the Industrial Siting Act applies to the extent that it doesn't have to do with the things that are specific to nuclear safety, nuclear regulation, all those things. But there's a lot of things in the Industrial Siting Act that deal with the imposition of these large mega projects on communities, things that make that transition better, the things that you think about. Other aspects of environmental controls, from salt on the roads to do the bridges need fixed, just all these things that we need to talk about and which industrial siting does. And then additionally, Mr. President, the amendment would provide for the payment of those funds in anticipation of future tax revenues to local communities to help to deal with the impacts. And it's a very large labor force coming into a very small community. They're going to need those impact payments. They're going to need, in order to make the whole project work and be successful, and to help those companies building this project to be successful, we need those impact payments to the community. This makes it clear. So I ask for your support.
Third reading amendment number 3 to 131. Any discussion? Any discussion? Senator Wasserberger.
Oh, Mr. President, thank you. On and against the amendment, and I think this amendment causes a lot of problems. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission does not issue permits. If you see on line 4, it requires a permit. It issues licenses. And the word permit of the amendment could be construed to be a permit from our department, DEQ. Combined with the rest of the amendment, and by bringing back in the industrial siting issues, is exactly what this could cause a preemption issue with the NRC. And I submit to this body, I don't believe that Wyoming has the expertise to be a part of this. And throughout the bill, you have all kinds of places where we're reporting back to the department and informing the department what's going on with the project. But the NRC needs to have preemption. They need to be in charge of this because, quite frankly, they're the experts and we are not. And so I would say that that's where we want to leave this. So on and against the amendment.
Senator Roths.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that the amendment be divided without objection.
Go ahead.
It's a little bit awkward because we only have the page 5, line 22 written once, and I'm going to split that in half, but I can have the page 5, line 22 with either if you deem that acceptable. So Division 1 is going to be lines 1 through 6 broken at the semicolon. Division number 2 is the remainder beginning with the word after. After, quote, period, quote, insert, and then the rest of the text, which would also be page 5, line 22. So the question is clearly divisible, even though the division requires a double use of page 5, line 22. If you find that in order,
So
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, so Senator, you take it through where, line 10?
Division 1 would
Yeah,
be...
got the Division 1. Give me 2 again.
Okay, Division 2 is the rest of the amendment. So it begins with the semicolon on line 6 and goes through the rest.
Okay. All right. It's a little different, but we're going to let it go. Talk about it. Division 1.
Thank you. Mr. President, Division 1 has the problem that was raised by the good senator from Campbell County. I'm on and against Division 1, and I have concerns about Division 1 causing the problems that we discussed the other day, even if the language were license as opposed to permit, and I can see where that doesn't necessarily do as much harm as perhaps others may consider. To me, looking at the language and looking at the intent of the Minerals Committee, the original structure, particularly including the word only, is the appropriate structure for the phrase that we have there, and I'd prefer to keep that original language. So on and against Division 1. Division 2 is going to be great when we get there.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion on Division 1? Senator Case?
Mr. President, I would rise in favor of Division 1. Let's just read exactly what it would say. It would say, the provisions of the Industrial Development Information and Siting Act, WS 3512-101 through 3512-119 shall apply to the extent that those provisions do not interfere with, contradict, or duplicate any requirements of the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission that are related to the issuance of a permit for the construction and operation of the advanced nuclear reactor. Clearly what that does, Mr. President, is to say, hey, if it's an NRC bailiwick with respect to getting this reactor up and going, you got it. We're right behind you. We're not going to duplicate. But there are so many other requirements, and the language in the bill is unclear, Mr. President, and this would clear it up. Urge your support.
Okay, Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, I rise on and against the Division 1. The Division 1 does just what we did not want to do with the bill. What we want to do with the bill is give up our preemption to the NRC. What we found out was the NRC was much more thorough than our Industrial Siting Act was, or DEQ. They go further than either one of those do. They do a complete study, environmental studies, all those things, and they will complete that. One of the issues we found out was that we had never dealt with an NRC study before. We have never had an NRC operation in our state, so we didn't know how much they would do. And once we heard that testimony, we said the NRC study will be completely adequate to take care of our thoughts of why we have an Industrial Siting Council and a DEQ, et cetera. So we said, let the NRC run this. So on and against Division 1.
Okay, further discussion on Division 1 of Amendment 3 to House Bill 131. Senator Case.
Here's the printed out version of the Industrial Siting Act. There are a lot of things in here that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is not going to care about or do anything about. They are not going to care about the surface of the road of the county highway. They are not going to care about workforce housing. They are not going to care. Our law covers that. That's why we wrote it. It's for when large projects come into our state and need to be accommodated. We need to have information up front about the impacts of those plants, and we need to work with communities. That's what our law does. There will be thousands of employees at this plant, which will cause great impacts on these communities. The NRC doesn't do this. It does some of it, and we should yield to them, absolutely. But it doesn't do everything in the Industrial Siting Act. It does not.
Further discussion? We are on Division 1, third reading Amendment number 3 to House Bill 131. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
No.
Division has failed. Division 2. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for Division 2. Mr. President, it is my understanding that this would either do nothing or do something good. I think it probably does nothing because it would be my understanding that this is how it should play out without this. In other words, I do not believe that there is anything in the advanced nuclear reactor statute that would preclude the distribution of the industrial siting payments pursuant to our act. But there has been concern that that's not clear. It's certainly the intent that I have. This simply stamps that in plain language and says, yes, that is exactly what will happen, and doesn't do anything else. So it doesn't go outside, Mr. President, of my expectations, but it certainly clarifies that that is how it would proceed. I'd encourage the body to support that because I have heard that concern that it isn't clear and there is uncertainty out there. Mr. President, I believe this simply dispels that uncertainty without changing my expectation of the policy. And I think that's consistent with what the Minerals Committee has expected in the interim. Thank you.
Discussion on the second division. Discussion. Okay, question being called. This is second division number 2 to third reading amendment number 3 to House Bill 131. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. No. Division has failed. Next up, read in.
Division on the division.
Division on the division. Okay, both divisions have failed, so back on what?
No, we're calling for a standing division on the votes.
Oh, standing, oh, I didn't hear you say division, sorry.
No worries.
Clear now, we've got a lot of divisions going on. All those in favor, stand. Division two, Division 2. Twelve. Those opposed, stand. Division fails. Third reading, amendment number 4 to House Bill 131. Please read it in.
House Bill 131, third reading amendment number 4 to engrossed copy, page 2, line 2, after.
Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would move third reading amendment number 4 to House Bill 131. So, Mr. President, this bill kind of encompasses two things: the advanced nuclear reactor and a high-level nuclear waste storage. So, Mr. President, what this amendment does is deals with the issue of the high-level nuclear waste storage facility, and it brings in 3511-1502, which is the application to the Industrial Siting Act, Mr. President. So the new language would read, any person undertaking the siting of any high-level radioactive waste storage facility shall do so in accordance with this article. The Industrial Development Information Siting Act shall apply to facilities subject to this article to the extent that those provisions do not interfere with, contradict, or duplicate any requirements of the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Notwithstanding this subsection, the Department of Revenue shall pay an impact assistance payment after construction of a storage facility in accordance with WS 3915-111 through 3916-111. That's the same provision about the impact assistance payments we discussed separately. But this brings in that to the extent it's not covered by the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, the impacts with respect to a high-level storage facility would be covered by industrial siting. Not the regulatory aspects, not walking around with radiation detectors, not protection, but roads, bridges, workforce, other environmental consequences of road work, on and on and on, the things in the Industrial Siting Act. It's the same concept as last time, and I appreciate your kind indulgence today, Mr. President.
We are on third reading amendment number 4 to House Bill 131. Discussion? Senator Wasserberger.
I'm sorry, Mr. President. On and against the amendment. And this brings back into the bill the whole waste storage issue, which I don't think should be a part of this bill. The bill is about advanced nuclear reactors and not about commercial nuclear waste storage, which is what 3511-1502 addresses. Again, bringing section 3511-1502 in causes the reactors to have to comply with Article 15 and causes the preemption issue to come back. The bill needs to be kept clean, Mr. President, and address the one issue of reactors. Commercial waste storage is a separate issue, and I would urge you to vote no.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Question being called. Third reading amendment number 4 to House Bill 131. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. No. Nays have it. Amendment's failed. Back on the bill. House Bill 131. Senator Rothfuss.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm a little disappointed and concerned at this point. When we worked this legislation in the off-season, there were concerns about clarity and ambiguity, and what we ended up doing in the off-season on the Minerals Committee was tabling it because we wanted additional input. We wanted to work some of the issues more, but there were a few underlying features that were desired, and that's the reason why it came back as a personal bill, even though this was originally a minerals bill. There's time. to provide that clarity. But I have supported this bill in every vote since that time because I support this project. Honestly, the failure of that Division 2, where it's now my impression that the chamber doesn't want the Department of Revenue to pay impact assistance and believes that the department doesn't have to, based on how I saw that vote turn out, tells me that maybe I don't know what I'm talking about on this, and I'm pretty sure I know more about how it's going than a lot of the folks that have been debating on it. So I'm left uncertain. That was my concern during the interim. I have changed to a no.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Ready for the question? Question being called. House Bill 131 having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? The chief clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, House Bill 131. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Beitman? No. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? No. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? No. Ellis? No. French? No. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? No. James? No. Kinski? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Cost? Aye. Landon? Aye. McEwen? No. Nethercott? No. Pappas excused. Perkins? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? No. Wasserberger? Aye. President Dockstader? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. House Bill 131, 16 aye, 13 no, 1 excused.
House Bill 131 having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, House Bill 131 has passed the Senate. House Bill 146, please read it in.
House Bill 146 engrossed, General Government Reports, sponsored by the House Appropriations Committee, an act relating to the administration of government.
There are amendments. Please read in the amendment.
House Bill 146, third reading amendment number 1 to engrossed copy, page 6, line 9N.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 146 and ask for your favorable consideration. Fellow senators, this is just a cleanup caught by staff to make section 10 and 11 effective immediately. Thank you.
Discussion, question on third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 146. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. We're back on the bill 146. Question? Question being called. House Bill 146 having been read 3 separate times. The question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, House Bill 146. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Furphy? No. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Hicks, aye. Hutchings? Aye. James? Aye. Kinski? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Cost? Aye. Landon? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas excused. Perkins? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. Wasserberger? Aye. President Dockstader? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. House Bill 146, 25 aye, 4 no, 1 excused.
House Bill 146, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, House Bill 146 has passed the Senate. Mr. Floor Leader, what's your desire?
Thank you. Did you want to go into committee of the whole, or does everybody want to eat?
Well, hold up, Mr. Floor Leader. We got everybody's favorite part, a couple of enrolled acts to sign.
Let's go to committee of the whole.
Mr. President?
Senator Perkins.
Before you start into this really exciting portion of the menu, could I have a privilege of the floor? I just wanted to announce, again, I was supposed to announce it last night, but I'm supposed to invite the Senate to crab night at Representative Nicholas's house. It's been a tradition of the legislature for many years. And if anybody wants to attend, you're invited. It's come whenever. Leave whenever, and it's 6225 Mountain View Drive here in Cheyenne, 6225 Mountain View in Cheyenne, and there's usually House members, Senate members, members from the executive, lobbyists. It's open to about anybody who is running around roams the halls of this Capitol. So you're all invited, and that's tonight, whenever you feel like coming over.
Thank you. Now, we do have some announcement time coming up, but go ahead.
Could I just get some clarification on that? That was crab as food, not to bring crab attitude, or what was that? It's just,
Well,
no crabby
by this time in the
stuff?
session, it's hard to define, so.
Just clarification.
Thank you. Signing of enrolled acts, with that order of business, signing of enrolled acts. Enrolled act number 43, read it in.
House Enrolled Act number 43, being original House Bill 71, an act relating to driver's licenses.
About to sign enrolled act number 43, the same being House Bill 71. So signed. Enrolled act 44, read it in.
House Enrolled Act number 44, being original House Bill 2, an act relating to the subdivision of land and water rights.
About to sign enrolled act number 44, the same being House Bill 2. So signed. Okay, back to you, Mr. Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've got an announcement first. Order forms are up front with the book for the president. If you want them, these have to be done by tomorrow. So if you want to get a copy of the book up there, there's envelopes up there. Put a check in the envelope and drop it off with the Senate Leadership Secretary. With that, I move we stand recessed till 2 p.m.
Announcements, Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you. Your Joint Transportation Committee, I guess that's not your committee, but the Joint Transportation Group will meet in W3 downstairs in about 15 or 20 minutes to take up interim topics. On a second announcement, it is the hope of the Conference Committee on House Bill 100 redistricting to get back together. We're hoping by about 4 o'clock this afternoon to continue work.
Thank you. Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Revenue Committee will meet for interim topics at 1 o'clock in Connector Room 5.
Thank you. Senator Kinsky.
Mr. President, at noon or upon adjournment, Joint Appropriations Committee will meet in the Joint Appropriations Committee Room 301 to discuss interim topics.
Okay, any further announcements? Have a note here, Secretary of State Ed Buchanan continuing the election integrity presentation. It'll be repeated again tonight or this afternoon at 4:30 in the Capitol Auditorium. All right. Stand recessed until 2 p.m. today, 2 o'clock.